Hi, this is Rosemary Armeo, and this is On the Brink. We're heading into part two of a conversation we kind of got cut off on last week. I don't know how that happened. I'm here with Wall Street investment banker and my old colleague from the roundtable, Mark Wittman, and with an old colleague of mine from way back, my beginning days in journalism, Mary Ann Sharkey. She's an outstanding investigative reporter, and she knows tons about politics too. And we promised a conversation last week, and we didn't get to all the things that we had on our list. So I want to open it today, not with immigration. I know we owe you something on that. We promised it, but with Ukraine, because we've reached the 2-year mark of the war against Ukraine, the hideous war against Ukraine by Russia. And I'm going to throw out this question. I'm curious what you think. Why haven't sanctions worked? We have gone after, Europe has gone after, the whole world seems to have gone after the economic strength of Russia. It seems stronger than ever. They have never backed down. They seem stronger than ever. How is that possible? What do you think, Mary Ann?
Well, I'm not an expert on sanctions, but I do know that we tried to strangle the oligarchs. And we thought that the oligarchs could get to Putin. And obviously that was a miscalculation because I don't think Putin cares about the oligarchs. And as it turns out, the oligarchs don't care about Putin either. And I don't, it's hard to say. We've tried to use these sanctions, but they just seem to fail every time. And we've just recently, now we just put on a whole new batch of sanctions, which I'm not even sure what all they are, other than they said, we have a whole new slew of sanctions.
Well, Mark, you are an economic expert. How come the sanctions aren't working? In fact, have sanctions ever worked any place?
Rosemary, I think your question is great. As a matter of fact, I've been walking around asking it myself. Let me tell you and the listeners where I've come to, but that's different than saying I'm not open to discussion or suggestions. Number one is, I would say, although economically they haven't worked, if you listen to people, particularly Ukrainians in Kyiv, they suggest that at least technologically they have. I actually heard a Ukrainian legislator on an FT panel, Financial Times panel, say, well, I wouldn't be talking to you from my apartment in Kyiv. I'd either be in another city or in a bunker if it weren't for the sanctions that have curtailed Russia's ability to replace the technology that it needs to build some of the weapons, particularly missiles. So I think we need to preface the answer to your question by saying, in some ways, sanctions have worked. I think the reason, though, we have sanctions ever worked? Well, certainly if you look at North Korea or Iran, it suggests that they have in the past, in terms of at least significantly crimping economic activity in the target countries. Different from saying they've elicited the behavior we want from those countries, but certainly we've inflicted pain. I think in the case of Russia, as best I can figure it, Rosemary, there are two issues. Number one, Russia is such a large component of the international oil market that once these sanctions started to work, the feedback loop in terms of increased oil price would have bit us and our allies in the ass too quickly and too hard for us to actually put the sanctions in properly. And what do I mean by put in properly? What you have to do in order to make these things work is that as soon as there's a workaround where the Russians are using another means of transporting their oil, you have to figure out what institutions in terms of banks and businesses are dealing with those rogue oil carriers. And if you can't sanction the rogue oil carrier directly, you can go potentially to their bank, their insurer, and other people with whom they do business and say, you have to stop doing business with all of these people. So there's a secondary. And I think the U.S. has been reticent to put on the necessary effort onto secondary sanctions because it didn't want oil prices in oil and natural
spiraling upward.
To spiral. So frankly, I actually think primarily it's because of our timidity. And I go ahead.
Go ahead. I think you're right. We never, in the first round and now in the second round, I am not seeing real pressure on the thing that would really hurt Russia, which are gas and oil prices. And then there's one other thing, which is a great criminality that Russia is capable of. They're going through Belarus and Kazakhstan to get a whole bunch of stuff that they should be getting and used to get from Europe. They're bypassing the whole sanctions route. And there's
Yeah.
how do we touch either of those places?
Well, for instance, in Belarus, now I'll get it wrong, but I'm sure in Belarus now they are buying probably 100 iPhones per capita.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And because they're all being shipped into, and what you have to do then is you knock on Apple's door and you say, we know, you and we know that those phones are going into Russia. You need to help us fix it. And there's his historical precedent for this. China used to ban, for instance, Philip Morris cigarettes, and everybody in Hong Kong for a while was smoking 5 packs a day. And so China went to Hong Kong and said, I went to Philip Morris rather, and to Hong Kong and said, you have to help us with this. So I think the U.S. has been timid. And I think this is a great way to open, because I do think the United States bears far more blame for what's happening than just the current Republican reticence to supply arms and cash to the Ukrainians. And it's because if you have to think about this problem, this started not 2 years ago, but in 2014.
Exactly.
And in response to that, Barack Obama and his administration, including Biden, actually prohibited the transportation of lethal weapons. And then even once this started, Biden took far too many steps back when there was a uranium-tipped threat by the Russians. He seemed far too afraid of it. I think, honestly, we've all learned that.
And may I add, they're still holding back, even before this current impasse caused by the Republicans in the House of not giving any money to Ukraine. We held back the big ordnance, the weapons that we are freely giving to Israel, may I point out, which is fighting a mostly unarmed citizenry rather than the second biggest military in the world. We're still not giving them weapons that they need.
That's correct. And it was just this week that Jens Stoltenberg highlighted for everyone, the head of NATO, or at least I forget what executive function he serves in NATO, highlighted that the rules of war would indeed allow Ukraine to defend themselves by going after legitimate targets in Russia. Now, presumably that's been true from day one. And frankly, I think the U.S. timidity around this, if you look all the way back to 2014, is something that leaves those of us who are on the side of the Ukrainians wishing that we had done a lot of things differently from quite some time ago.
Okay, you can see why we went over last week. These are topics that get us all going. You've been listening to Mark Wittman. We used to be together on the roundtable. It's so nice to have you here again to try this. But I'm going to switch now to Mary Ann Sharkey from Ohio, a journalist and a politician. Russia has not been timid. Russia just killed the Putin's most outstanding critic, and that, of course, is Alexei Navalny. Do you think it's related to his opposition, not just to Putin's everything about him, but specifically to Ukraine? Is his death connected to that?
Well, I can't really say, Rosemary, but I mean, the whole thing is mysterious in terms of its timing. You really have to wonder if this opposition by the Republican Party to giving more money to the Ukrainians, particularly the House Republicans, to give more money. And then, of course, Ohio's J.D. Vance, Senator J.D. Vance, of hillbilly elegy fame, which is a whole different issue, because the town he's from is not in Appalachia, but that could only be said by me, an Ohioan, because I can tell you the whole thing's pretty much a fraud, because Middletown is between Cincinnati and Dayton, which is one big metropolitan area. And it's also a thriving area with a lot of jobs, and it's never had the same problems as Appalachia. But I digress there.
That's allowable.
I think the timing is just because we once again have weakened our own selves. We have shown Putin our vulnerabilities. We have shown Putin we don't have the strength to follow through. I mean, it's always been, I think, with him, his knowledge of the United States, and the fact that, the United States has ADHD. And
Mm-hmm.
we really do not pay a long, we don't look in the long run. Putin does think in the long run. I mean, it's very, very long-term strategies. And he knows about the American election cycle. He knows about the Republicans. They certainly were helping Trump. There's no question about it. And so I think that the fact that he was so emboldened during this period of the fact that the United States is just sitting there on its hands, trying to figure out what it's going to do next for Ukraine, gave him an opportunity to take care of his enemy.
Yeah, I find the timing also interesting. Like, why now? He has been a thorn in Putin's side for
Right.
decades. And it was so ham-handed. I mean, I think he wanted it known as an assassination. And really, just as Crimea gave Russia a free hand to go after the rest of Ukraine now, didn't our behavior under the Trump administration with Khashoggi, a journalist from the Washington Post, being killed, dismembered, cut up into pieces and hidden, and we didn't do anything to Saudi Arabia, does that not say to Putin, hey, I'm going to get away with this?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, no question about it. The fact that we were so weak-kneed and did not hit back, of course, Trump's, son-in-law got a $20 billion investment out of the Saudis, which, it's so interesting that they pound and pound on Hunter Biden while it's totally ignoring the real theft.
Oh, no, don't tell me you're digressing now into American political
Hunter
hypocrisy.
Hunter Biden was like a pickpocket compared to what happened to a whole bank embezzlement that went down. So I think the fact that we were very weak-kneed and Trump was very weak-kneed, and in the meantime, Putin knew that they were trying to get dirt on Joe Biden. And the Saudis are equally know our politics, knows our cycles, understands what makes us tick, and now
and plays us.
And yes, right, and takes advantage of our weakness.
So I'm going to switch back now to Mark, because we've talked about this in the past. I had predicted, I'm stunned they lasted this long. I thought Ukraine was going to fall immediately, and they held up, and they have been incredibly brave and resilient. And I could go on and on about them. I so admire that spirit. But the long-term thinking of Putin is paying off. They don't have enough people to throw at the front lines anymore. They're going to drop the age for conscription from 27 down to 25. They need warm bodies. Can they keep this up, even with a European and American help, should that ever come again? Can they really keep it up, or is Russia going to win? Mark?
I think the Ukrainians can keep it up. I think they face three challenges. One, as you say, is to continue to muster the requisite personnel. And Rosemary, actually, I think the solution to that problem lies to their east. Frankly, Putin has had the same issue, and he's used a formula that includes coercion and economic incentive to get people into the trenches. And the Ukrainians need to emulate that, perhaps in different mixes with less coercion and more incentive. But there is an answer for that problem. Obviously, the Ukrainians need continued military support. There's a node here that says a decision node where if the U.S. doesn't stay in, they've got to limit their objectives to holding the line as best they can. With the U.S. in, it's a different formula. The other thing that the Ukrainians need are hope and will. There will be no elections, and it's important for Zelensky, particularly given the degradation in his popularity, to make sure that at least socially within the country, there's a place to give voice to opposition. And I think there's going to be pressure on him to form some sort of a government which includes the opposition in the absence of elections, because I think that hope and will is the key. I actually think that Russia is far weaker than we in the West can articulate because of the lack of visibility we have. I don't see them overrunning Ukraine. You and I have talked about the fact that there is no modern example of an insurgency that's been quelled by a larger power when that larger power has knocked on the door. I think the real risk to the Ukrainians, back to the will and hope point, is that if they're not overrun militarily, the risk is that they become ever less democratic and lose their gaze towards the West and their interest in reforming their society. That's the real, to me, that's the Ukraine defeat that is a more realistic scenario than the Russians raising the flag in Kyiv.
You know, we're talking about big global geopolitical movement here, and that leaves out the little people. But I promised Mary Ann a minute here to talk about some efforts being made by citizens, not the government, but we don't have to get this through House Republicans. There's things we can do as Americans to show support for people fighting for democracy. For me, it has been donating money to Ukrainian journalists whose families are also at risk. Their lives and homes are in danger, just like the soldiers, and they're still there reporting, and they have been for 2 years now. Mary Ann, tell us a little bit about your efforts to help in a small way in Ukraine.
Well, mine, of course, it's just a small way, but it's what any individual, including your listeners, can do, which is sign up to be a sponsor. And you can sign up through Uniting for Ukraine. I sponsored a mother and her daughter. The mother is 41 and the daughter is 26. And well, actually she's 46 and 26. But it's been a wonderful experience for me. I met them at the airport, Cleveland airport. They didn't know me, so I brought a Ukrainian flag, and they were thrilled, and we settled them down immediately. Unfortunately, Cleveland they don't drive, so Cleveland did not have public transportation. So I ended up I took them to Ukrainian Village in Chicago, where they are settled now, and they both have retail jobs. The rub here is there's couple of things I want to talk about. One was they do not have refugee status, and that is something people don't know. They don't have a path to citizenship in the United States. Right now, they are called humanitarian parolees, which is kind of like the purgatory. They're neither fish nor fowl. They're here for 2 years. The mother and daughter that I sponsor, they'll be up in probably October, and I don't know whether the United States is going to renew the programs for them or what. The other thing is, it was very apparent to me when we first got into these programs, Social Security wasn't prepared to handle it. The welfare departments, state welfare departments, were not prepared at all. It was frankly a nightmare. It took me 6 months to get them a Social Security number. They could not work without Social Security. They couldn't open a bank account without Social Security. I went 5 different times. Each and every time I was promised it would be another 14 days. And I'd go back again, it'd be another 14 days. And then they put them in a Medicaid program without dental benefits. And then the welfare department, treating them just like any welfare person in the United States, was demanding that they be job hunting. Well, they couldn't job hunt because they didn't have Social Security numbers. So it was a long, and finally I got Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio, his office, and worked with them. And I also worked with the Cuyahoga County Council, and both times I was successful. But there's not a lot of people, Rosemary, and I will admit it,
right,
and know how to call Sherrod Brown, and know how to call the county council, and know how to get
and have the nerve to do it like you do.
Yes,
exactly.
And I have to wonder what happened, to all these other Ukrainians who came over and didn't have, the ability to access these agencies and government.
Well, Mary Ann, this is just the problem with these people coming into the United States. They're just looking for the benefits. They're just trying to rip off our rich system, and they didn't do anything for us. We're going to talk more about immigration in a minute. We have to take a break here. Our Mayo on the Brink is brought to you by the Donna Frank team of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Blake Realtors. That's a mouthful. But Donna is super impressive. We met when she worked at WAMC as a crack fundraiser. And since then, she's moved on to become also crack, a licensed real estate salesperson. Last year, she ranked as the top agent in the capital region. If you need honest answers about your real estate, check in with her. You are going to be impressed too, I promise. You can reach her at, this is the email, DonnaFed, DONAFED @gmail.com. The Apple Barn and Country Bake Shop on Route 7 in Vermont is closed right now. It is winter, you remember. They're closed until March 15th, but plans are already underway for a big spring reopening, new festivities. I understand mimosas may be involved, along with the donuts and pies that they're famous for, the Apple Barn. So keep an eye on their website. It is theapplebarn, all one word, .com. You'll hear and see announcements there. Karen's Place, Karin, is a gorgeous retreat. I've been there and visited on 22 acres out in Vermont, rural Vermont. It's available for rental for everything from weddings and family reunions to corporate conferences. It's close to city centers around here, but you would think you were in another country. It's beautiful. Go to www.karensplacevt.com. Today, as we are taping this, the Senate is considering the impeachment of the Homeland Security Secretary. This perceptive action by House Republicans is likely finally to settle the problem with immigration, right, Mark?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You know, Rosemary, the immigration problem to me actually seems like it has a pretty straightforward solution. And I actually think we have to thank Governor Abbott and his ilk for exposing it, which I know sounds a little twisted given, look, the policy of moving people around on deceptive premises is cruel. But I think it points out that there's clearly a limit in the United States as to how many people at any one given time we as a country can integrate into our society. And I also think that limit is approximately knowable. If you go out to all the municipalities and say, how many do you have room for? And you configure a set of government incentives that's properly designed to get municipalities to stretch, I think you can figure out what the capacity here is. Then I think
interesting. That's an interesting idea. So you would come up with a number, like we can let in this many people.
That's right. And then the thing that you have to do that's a little controversial is you have to go to the border and you have to put your hand on the asylum dial and fix that dial to correspond with what fits into this country. Now, technically, we are party to an international agreement that lays out rules, not numbers, as to who we allow in for asylum. Frankly, I think you've got to figure out a way to square that circle. You know, the immigration problem has changed dramatically since the 1990s and 2000s, and the rhetoric hasn't changed. It used to be that there were Mexicans and Central Americans, mostly young men, who avoided contact with immigration, got into the labor force, and sent money back home. Some of them aspired to stay here for a long time and ended up doing so. Now people seek contact because, frankly, they're trying to use the asylum system. The other thing we need to do is acknowledge to ourselves that out of the pool of people that show up, we only toss out somewhere between 15 and 30% sort of quickly, depending on the time frame you're looking at and whose numbers you're hearing. The rest of them stay on for years in the asylum process, and only an estimate is only 80 to 90% of them won't be successful. So we need to flip this thing sort of on its head, hire the number of immigration judges we need, and give people an answer when they show up at our borders immediately, frankly. And what that will do is if people realize that their odds are incredibly small, they'll stop showing up. And
Okay,
we'll stop playing this cruel game where we tempt these people to go through that arduous journey that we all know about.
right. This is an interesting plan, not advanced before. Mary Ann, did you give any credence to that, or do you have another plan that might
Well,
work?
I've come from Ohio. Obviously, continues to lose population, as do most of the industrial states. And they need the labor force. They need people to come in to these cities. I mean, you look at Cleveland. I mean, it had double, triple the population it has now in 1950. I don't understand why we can't come up with some big urban incentive to bring workers into these communities. There are houses. We're just tearing houses down left and right.
Yep.
I mean, it's an industry now in Cleveland and Columbus and Toledo and Youngstown and all of these cities. It's a whole industry just to tear down old factories and tear down houses and tear down malls. If you start repopulating, as we did obviously during the great immigration in the 1800s, we started populating these areas, and people started finding work, and they started selling goods to each other, and they started doing. I just don't understand why it doesn't occur to these decision makers that we have these giant cities that have lots of land, have lots of housing available,
Housing stock that could be repaired.
Available.
Yes.
That
yes.
could I mean, a lot of this housing stock is not what the Americans like, because most of it is like, two or three bedrooms and one bathroom downstairs. Right. This housing stock does not appeal to Americans. And
but compared to a tent on the Texas border, exactly. It's pretty palatial. Exactly. You're right. I've never understood this argument, and Trump made it, that, we're filled up. We're not. I mean, you could just fence off Wyoming and just fill that up, and that would be fine. But there's more sheep there and cattle than people, and that's only half joking as I say that. There are jobs going unfilled in every place in America right now. So why is it that we don't act? Everybody blames everyone else. It's the president's fault. It's the House Republicans' fault. Well, it is their fault, but you don't need them to actually act. I don't understand why Governor Hochul in New York, we've lost millions of people. We have jobs begging. There's New York, however, is overrun with immigrants coming in for whom there are no adequate facilities. So why isn't she talking to the mayors of municipalities throughout the state? Why isn't she talking to Governor Abbott? Why does it require the House, which has proved it will not act, or the president, who's caught in this political maelstrom? Where is the lack of action and leadership? Just is so frustrating.
It is frustrating, and the lack of imagination.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I do think though it's sort of a pipeline problem. I think there are only so many people. If you ask the mayor of New York City, he'll tell you there's only so many people you can take at once. I think as a nation, Rosemary, we need to start to coordinate that. If you look historically, immigration and integration in the United States has been our superpower. It has been fundamental to our historical culture, politics, and economic success. And it will be so in the future. Unfortunately, the system has gotten so backwards. We need to make sure we frankly get it right. The one thing I would say, these are sort of footnotes, I do have a little bit of uneasiness when I hear people say, well, we have jobs in the United States that U.S. citizens won't do that immigrants will. I worry that there might be something about the conditions or pay or mix of conditions and pay for those jobs that ought to give us pause. Not every job that can be conceived of should necessarily be done for minimum wage in this country. So I do think we have to be careful.
Yeah, it's those jobs, however, have traditionally been entry-level jobs for new immigrants, and they have been appreciated. And there are jobs that Americans not going to. We are not going to go pick crops. So Hispanic workers who come in will always have an opening there. There are jobs in factories. There are retail jobs. There are waitressing and waiting jobs all over this country that are not dirty or discussing. What instead we're seeing, and this is another horrible thing, is we're seeing reductions and relaxations in child labor laws, and immigrant children are being put into these jobs, not their parents who can't get Social Security and work permits. They're putting the kids into work. So there's the problem with paying low wages. Put in a kid, work him to death, and pay him nothing, and they're not even going to school. So they're
Well,
never going to
I have a giant nursery across the street from me. I mean, literally across the street from me, with 300 Mexican workers. And frankly, I've got to know some of them. They come in on a bus in February or March, and they leave at Thanksgiving, and they live in barracks. And they send all their money home while they're here for 9 or 10 months. Right. Well, the one person I'm familiar with, his name is Martin Rojas. Martin, his family now owns a business. He owns 2 homes and 4 cars in Mexico. Yep. And he's making that money in 9 months every year, coming to the United States to pick crops. Now, he's worked himself into a supervisory position, but he's living like a king in his neighborhood in Mexico.
If you have your roof fixed in upstate New York right now, it is going to be done by a crew of Hispanic workers. And they come in and they do an entire gigantic house. I just had this done in 2 days. They're paid well. They're so appreciated by the companies that don't have enough workers and have more work than they can handle. So no, Mark, I think that's a barrier that does not really exist. However, okay, let's talk though a little bit about whether there's money to pay anybody in government after the end of this week. As we are taping, we're coming into the last 4 or 5 days before the government is fully funded. What's your prediction on that, Mr. Banker?
Well, Rosemary, history has taught me to bet against shutdowns. We seem to be very proficient at kicking the can down the road. I will say when the House set up this structure where they would only shut down part of the government initially and then another part, I don't like making it easier to get into the shutdown pool by putting the stairs in front of us. I'd like to force them to sort of jump in all at once and hope that that's enough of a deterrent. So I think it's unlikely. I think the structure makes it slightly more likely than it's been. But I think it continues to speak to the dysfunction, particularly within the House of Representatives.
Yeah, well, I think everybody's tuned this out, don't you? I mean, this is like, little boy cried wolf. I mean, this keeps happening over and over and over again, and people are no longer taking it seriously at all. I mean, this has been going on since Newt Gingrich, and Bob Dole, walked up on stage here swinging a golf club and shut the government down during the Clinton years. It's again, I think just people are saying, this brinkmanship. They're tired of it, and they're not paying attention to it, and they don't care.
So the theme of our 2-part conversation has been contingency plans, or alternative plans, if I can put it that way. What would be a better way to be handling this? Should debt ceilings and running up against the limit, should that even be a matter for Congress? Isn't there a different way to do it?
I don't know, maybe listen to the constituents, maybe listen to the people that voted them in, maybe do what we've actually asked for. Maybe listen to all the polling and the voting that says we don't want any of the bullshit that they're doing right now. I don't know, just chiming in there.
That's crazy talk. That's Zach Grady, our producer, and he's nuts.
God forbid.
But talking about crazy talk and actions, what is with Nikki Haley? What is she doing? Why is she still in this race? She's lost everywhere. She's lost decisively, including in her home state to Donald Trump. Why is she still slogging along here? What do you think, Mary Ann?
I think that she's trying to set herself up for another run. She thinks somehow this is going to help her in 2028. I'm not sure it's going to translate or help her at all. I mean, or she's possibly just, thinking that, Trump could drop dead, or he could be, actually hauled off to jail. She might just, be rolling the dice. She might just be playing the lottery right now with her candidacy.
Mark, what do you think?
I agree. I heard a commentator say that she's running for the office of president of I Told You So within the Republican Party. which I thought was pretty good. I think there's no national stage that's available to her, particularly given she's unlikely to be in a Trump administration, that's equivalent to the attention she's getting now. So I think she's staying on the stage for her long-term benefit. And I also think, as was mentioned, I think she's trying to extend the period of time during which she's the only other alternative, such that even if she gets out and down the road, Trump runs into some intractable problem, she increases the odds that the party feels obligated to turn to her as opposed to the vice presidential candidate or one of the other primary participants who dropped out long ago. So I actually think what she's doing is pretty logical. I'm not a Haley fan, but I do give her credit for taking a thumping in her home state and continuing on given the parameters that she faces. And I think it's a perfectly logical approach from her standpoint, given the peculiar circumstances.
Wow, I perhaps I am blinded by my distaste for her. She's an immigrant who votes against solid immigration reform. She's a woman who votes against reproductive rights for women. In every way, she's an opportunistic, hypocritical person. And now she's saying, well, I'm different than like Liz Cheney, who also bucked Donald Trump. I will be remembered. Why? Why is she going to get recognition from Republicans unhappy with Trump that Liz Cheney, for example, did not? Can you answer
I don't
me
think
that?
I don't see her benefiting from this. I really don't.
No, I don't either.
I mean, I think it's a folly. I think that she, somehow, I mean, let's face it, a lot of them are just trying out to write a book, to get a job with cable television as a commentator. I mean, Newt Gingrich, again, kind of paved that way. I think his whole run for president was not really a run for president. It was a run for, just being in the news. And there's a lot of these politicians these days do that. I saw John Kasich out of Ohio do that. He didn't have a prayer. But here he is, he's making a good living as a political commentator. And writing books.
Yes.
Even before Newt Gingrich, remember, I think Pat Buchanan set the mold.
That's right.
As best I can remember this.
I think you're right.
I do think Haley's circumstances are different. I think it's not impossible that something happens to Trump that makes it impossible for him. And if I were her, I would want to be the obvious number two for as long as I could fund it, so that the party has to come to me if something makes it impossible for him to continue.
Okay, A, the party is now run by Trump operatives, including his daughter-in-law. And B, why would they come running to him even if there is an opening? Trump goes to jail, they need a new candidate. Please listen to me about that. Why would it only be her? You don't think the DeSantis's and maybe other Republicans who didn't run openly this time would come forward and still would beat her?
I think every day she's his only opposition. Her claim to being that backup candidate just gets a little bit better. It's by no means assured.
Yeah. So it's a gamble she's taking.
It's a big gamble. She's rolling the dice. Yeah. She'll be out. I think she'll be out after Super Tuesday.
Yeah, she said she would only last.
Yeah, she'll run out of money. The Koch brothers are already, cutting her off. Actually, Koch brother, is actually is actually, has now cut her off. So once she runs out of money after Super Tuesday, I just can't imagine she'll be able to stay in.
Okay, go ahead, Mark. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. Well, then she'll be the president of I Told You So for the next 4 years. It didn't get Hillary Clinton much, but we'll see what it does for her.
Oh, I can't even say Hillary Clinton in the same breath as Nikki Haley. Here's my last question for you guys. I hate to end this because I love talking with you. I'm going to bring you back again. So you're beholden to me for future. But who is a politician who gives you hope today? Who is someone who you see as, the sort of leader that used to come along kind of regularly in American politics, but we have not seen in a while? Who would that be?
That's a stumper. Let me think. I'm not sure who you could say that you have a lot of faith in. Maybe the governor of Michigan, the governor of California. Um, I would probably look into the ranks of governors at this, because they actually have to run something. They don't just have to,
Yeah.
run at the mouth like they do at the House of Representatives and the Senate. They actually have to run a have a real budget and worry about taxation, and they worry about balancing the budget, and they've got to actually deliver services to people. So I would look into the ranks of governors.
Interesting. How about you, Mark? You got one?
Well, the two that I find make me wince less when I hear them than others are Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. I think she's genuine. I think she's intelligent, and I think she's got her constituents' best interests at heart. And I continue to be very impressed by Pete Buttigieg, frankly.
Oh, yeah. I thought he was disappointing as a transportation director. I'm sorry. Why didn't he go to Ohio when that train wrecked? Would have been
yes. Well,
and he would have won them over too. He could have just blown them away with his rhetoric, and instead he gets all high and mighty. I don't.
Well, I really, just we're in the media business here, or we're in the media business. I really would have liked to have seen Pete in the position of being the communications director and overseeing all the communications and all the messaging for Biden, because they've done a lousy job. And Pete is great at it. He's really good. I love every moment he gets on Fox News and he takes them down peg by peg. It's just a wonder to behold.
Okay, well, I would pick Katie Porter, and I realize that she may be even out of Congress after she's now running for the Senate and against stiff opposition, but she's smart. She asks really good questions. I really love her. I'd like someone like that in office. We need to end this, and traditionally we end our discussions with a toast. So I propose one today to the Ukrainian people who have lost insufferable, just horrible losses. 10 million people displaced or thrown out of the country, 100,000 dead. They're young men. The few that are remaining are going to be called up to go to the line to become basically cannon fodder. Their homes are destroyed. The world is really, including the United States, has left them hanging, and they still fight on with incredible spirit, all for the sake of something we say we believe in, and we have to show that we support them, and that's freedom. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your being on. I love our sponsors, and I want to tell you about two more of them. One is Pine Valley Press of Williamstown, Mass. It was founded way back in 1979. Go here. I'll give you their website in a second. You can find here and even order the music of David Keckley. He is the composer who put together those segments that you hear at the beginning, the end, and in the intervals in our podcast. We get numerous comments, usually almost always compliments about that music. That's Pine Valley Press, all one word, .com. Check it out. And one of our first sponsors, still with us, has been Peacock Pots Pottery. That's a tongue twister for me. They offer the unique work of their founder, who is engineer turned artist, Ona Papageorgiou. You can check out the pictures of what she is capable of. It's really remarkable. At, again, all one word, peacockpots.com. Please subscribe to an Armeo on the Brink. This doesn't cost anything, and it really helps us out a lot. You can just go to the podcast platform of your choice and follow their instructions to subscribe or follow or like and rate us. The more you do that, the more sponsors that we can end up getting. And that gives us a chance to do more and more extensive programming, which I would really like. I think you would like it too. I also have to tell you about something new we have coming on later this month, an On the Brink website. This is a place where you will be able to interact with me and our guest panelists, get background information on the issues and the topics that we bring up. You can make suggestions. render complaints even. You can hear my rants. And I have a lot of opinions, you know. A weekly podcast just can't contain them all. So watch out for our upcoming website.